Forbes India presents AWS The Mavericks in association with Matrix Partners India.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Forbes India presents AWS The Mavericks, CTO Conversation on the Next Normal, powered by artificial intelligence and machine learning in association with Matrix Partners. To our audience who've joined us this afternoon, we want to thank you for taking time out to be with us, and we hope you're staying safe after a particularly devastating few months. Please continue to maintain social distancing, wear masks, and step out only if absolutely necessary. We joined this afternoon by some of the brightest minds from corporate world to take us through what is essentially going to be the future of business and the world. We have Mr. Sandeep Agarwal, the CTO of Games 24/7. We have Mr. Sachin Garg, the head of data science at PayU. Mr. Bhupinder Singh, the head of data science at Ecom Express. And Mr. Olivier Klein, the chief technologist, AWS Solutions Architecture. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today. We're in the midst of so much uncertainty. While the devastating second wave of COVID is certainly behind us in India, there's now a looming threat of a third wave, which could be equally devastating, particularly considering how people have taken to the streets. We don't know how it will all play out, and we can only hope that it's not a repeat of what we saw a few months ago. But whether a crisis hits us or not, the one thing that the past few years has taught us and has taken us to is ambiguity. For the business world, the situation has most definitely reshaped our thinking and even how businesses are actually run. Only those who are agile can understand and emerge successful at the end of the crisis. That's where technology has come as a savior. While artificial intelligence and machine learning were transforming the business world even before the pandemic hit us last year, its use was pronounced as the world came to a pause and businesses had to rely on digital technologies to keep the lights on. We've seen that across sectors, such as in finance, where digital economy and mass adoption of online shopping became more rampant. In many cases, the adoption of AI/ML have helped companies cut down go-to-market time, improve resources and process efficiency, optimize operations, target the right consumers, creating a direct impact on the bottom line and the success of the company. It's only an added benefit that AI/ML have often created additional revenue streams for companies by identifying new business streams and personalizing products and services to enhance customer acquisition and engagement. That also opens up pertinent challenges for companies on asking the right questions from the algorithm for the desired results on data privacy and security, and elimination of bias in learning models. At the center of it all sits a CTO, whose prerogative to use these tools wisely becomes all the more crucial. So let me begin today's discussion by asking all of you gentlemen about how business has been over the past few months and what has fundamentally changed for you as a result of COVID-19. We'll start with Sandeep and then go around to all our other panelists.
Thanks, Manu. Business has changed substantially over the last, I'd say, 15 months since we got into the throes of COVID. The first and foremost thing, we being in the gaming sector, we've seen a massive surge in traffic. We've seen a lot of people flock to the online world to get entertained, and that has led to an enormous amount of increase in the kind of services, in patronage of the kind of services we offer. And the second part that has changed for us substantially is there's just a lot of attempts at sort of breaching our perimeter and hackers trying to get hold of our users' data and so on. So security has become a bigger and bigger prerogative for us going forward, and we have to ensure that we can sort of keep up with it. So those are the two biggest changes that I foresee that have happened due to COVID over the last 15, 16 months.
Absolutely. Let me take that question to Sachin. Sachin, your thoughts?
Sure, Manu. First of all, thank you. Very excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Hope we'll have a great discussion today. I think last 15 months, like Sandeep said, right? I think from both the personal level, colleagues, friends, family, it's been a very, very, very tough past 15 months. Just on a personal level, right? Almost all of us have probably stories that are fairly tragic. From a business point of view, I think it's a mixed bag as far as PayU is concerned. So let me give you a sense, right? So PayU operates two market-leading businesses. One is on the credit side, which is lending, and we go from like a pay later product, which is an interest-free 15-day product, to a unsecured cash loan product, which can go up to 5 lakhs or 10 lakhs. And then we run a payment processing business, which is e-commerce transactions, etc. And it's been very, very different in each two businesses, right? When COVID, so there was a pre-COVID era, and then when the COVID hit, we saw a dip in both businesses. But the payment processing business like climbed very, very fast, and that business is kind of far ahead than even pre-COVID levels now. So things got digitized, people transacted online more, like Sandeep was saying, gaming has picked up, etc. But on the credit side, because of financial troubles, because of people losing employment, because of many other factors, we saw the demand on the credit side go significantly down. And we have seen these waves, right? So the COVID first wave came, things became extremely bad from a credit point of view. The moment it died down, we saw the demand pick up, and then COVID second wave hit, and we saw the same pattern again. And like you said, it's probably something that we may see, we may not see when the third wave hits, but from our business point of view, we just have kind of this dichotomy between the credit side and the payment side of our business. It has implications a lot on, like how the population changed, right? How the spending patterns changed, how the data changed, what does it do to our models, both on the credit side and payment side. So a lot of changes in these last 15 months, both from spending patterns, credit demand, underlying data, underlying spend patterns, and so on and so forth.
Absolutely. I think we'll come to all of that. Let me bring in Bhupinder here. Bhupinder, was that how the same, business has been for you? So many different waves. What has it been like for you?
Sure. I think these have been trying times, like Sachin rightly pointed out, at the personal level and for businesses. These have been times of introspection and certainly enough opportunity for innovation as well. And we've been seeing a mixed situation on our side as well. There has been opportunity knocking our door. A lot of people, while they were under lockdown, have been at homes. They've been ordering online, right? Which has meant higher demand on the e-commerce side, right? On the ground, however, it wasn't as free. Movement of goods was not as free as it used to be, right? There were places that were under containment zones. There were lockdowns. Cross-border movement was difficult at so many locations. So running the business was a lot harder on the other side. So there's been both sides to this. There's been a lot of opportunity through the introspection. We've been leveraging AI to help manage some of our risk. We've been leveraging AI to optimize on costs wherever we could, to find newer opportunities in terms of automating what we could.
Right.
And certainly some of that innovation is helping us now.
I think we'll speak a lot about those innovations in a bit. Let me just bring in Oliver here. Oliver, you're based out of Hong Kong. How, from your perspective, global businesses, what's been the impact over the past few years?
Yes. Obviously, you have the flexibility here to look all over Asia Pacific, and I think I would echo pretty much what we heard from our other panelists here. I think the businesses that basically went to that digital transformation earlier, before pre-COVID, fared a lot better than those that didn't, and primarily, by the fact that we very often now work from home, we work via digital mediums, we use our mobile applications, and we've seen a lot of companies that basically had businesses that were completely reliant on physical stores or physical interactions that basically had to flip their business model around within days, or entire call centers that had to be brought home in a secure kind of workspace environment, etc. So we've seen basically those businesses that went to that digital transformation, that had an agile workforce, that had the possibility to quickly change things around, adapt to that business model, And obviously, from an AWS perspective, but in general, I think those businesses that obviously use cloud computing also saw the benefit when it comes to scale, because I think in the past we often talked about scale and we always thought about it as scaling up. There were businesses that benefited from the cloud computing in the sense that they could completely scale down and say we got to save cost now because we don't need all of that infrastructure, etc. And I think the other second part, which personally was very interesting for me, was that I had the chance to work with a variety of pharmaceutical companies that were researching COVID-19 vaccines, where we make use of data sets that we get from hospital, other healthcare spaces, and kind of brought that in to do clinical trials, etc. So I think, and I think we talk a little bit more about that later on how, AI, machine learning, data overall can be used in many different ways. And, especially with COVID-19, I think there was some very interesting use cases and applications there. But I mean, generally, I think it's really the element of, we all kind of went digital, just like here we all sit either way remotely or in our office or from home.
Absolutely.
And run this. So I think digital transformation was really accelerated with this unfortunate pandemic.
So let me throw a question to you, Oliver. The past year, take us through, the enhanced role of AI, ML in businesses as a result of the disruption. I mean, what have you seen? I'll, of course, ask the others also in their line of business, but how have you seen, the sort of enhanced role of AI and ML in that?
Yeah, sure. So I think, if we think about data analytics, we think about machine learning or even AI, this is really not something new. I mean, AIs have been around for decades, right? I think the difference is really in the power of what we can actually do, thanks to cloud computing, thanks to the availability of massive GPUs that allows us to run a variety of frameworks and really go into the space of computer vision, natural language processing, personalization, etc., forecasting, etc. All of that stuff has become increasingly more powerful. But I think the key point here is that this space is also being democratized. Thanks to a variety of different frameworks out there, thanks to plenty of research teams, but also thanks to cloud computing. I speak on top of AWS behalf, but I think that the message holds true that now any company out there can get access to the same AI or machine learning models than some of the largest technology providers out there. If you look at AWS, if you want a recommendation or personalization engine or forecasting or fraud detection, you can get access to the same engine that Amazon.com is using by using AWS. So I think that the real key differentiator that I've observed in the last years is that first and foremost, that entry barrier has been really lower. Like everyone can really make use of machine learning models fairly easily, maybe even without any machine learning expertise. And then on top of it, if you want to, go a bit more specific, also the availability of data sets and having an ecosystem around that. That availability of data really drives some of these very interesting machine learning use cases and models. And I'm happy to share a little bit later, but
yeah, absolutely. We'll come to that definitely.
Yeah.
Let me, of course, throw that question across to Sandeep, Sachin, and Bhupinder also. How have you? We'll start with Sandeep. The past year, when you look at the enhanced role of AI, ML. As a result of the disruption, do you see an enhanced role happening here, and what has been your experience on that front?
Sure. Manu, of course, as I mentioned, for us, the biggest changes that came in were just the amount of traffic that we were going to take in. And so we started going to a forecasting model, a slick data science forecasting model that helped us figure out what kind of traffic we're going to see on different days of the week and different matches of a tournament in an IPL and so on and so forth, right? That allowed us to scale up our infrastructure in order to be able to support the needs that we were going to have for that particular day or that particular match. In terms of, one other thing that happened during the, with respect to the growth spurt that we saw, there was real money gaming is always something that can get addictive. There's just no denying that. People get a lot of kick out of it, and some people can get sucked into sort of getting addicted to it. And so we ended up spending a lot of time trying to figure out responsible gameplay behavioral models. And we came back with a framework that allowed us to flag irresponsible gameplay by players and sort of ejecting them from the system or starting to notify them saying, hey, you've gone beyond a certain limit, or your losses, are you going to be able to support these losses, so as to ensure that we can do our part in trying to tell them that they're maybe going overboard here. And I think that helped us in terms of our ability as a platform to have more and more of responsible and a lot lesser of completely frivolous gameplay that was seen on other platforms. So I think both on the responsible gameplay side, there was obviously some innovation that we did with respect to using AI and ML there. What also happened during this time is a lot of new people took to real money gaming, and that increased the risk factor for the genuine or the players that we've always had on the platform. And so risk comes in different shapes and forms, and we used lots of supervised learning models to essentially ensure that we can take care of things such as chip dumping or fraud detection. We got massive frauds with bonuses, and we started to get hold of that fairly quickly because of some of the AI models that we had built. But then also in terms of another thing where we use graph neural networks to help us detect collusion. Like two players would get on a rummy table and then sort of collude with each other to sort of scam money out of the other players, because they would collude to beat them. And so we had to work towards eliminating that, because the success of a real money gaming platform completely lies in only one thing, which is trust. How much trust the players can have in that platform. And so from that angle, risk became another important dimension for us to focus on, and we needed to do it very quickly. So those were a few different things where I would say, because of the pandemic, we had to invest heavily, quickly, and sort of we were able to see good outcomes out of those initiatives.
Fascinating. And I guess those investments didn't, of course, turned out quite well. Sachin, your thoughts? What's really happening at PayU on that front?
Yeah, absolutely, Manu. So, I think if I look back, the last large disruptive event that kind of shook the fintech industry or finance industry was, the 2008 financial crisis, right? And in terms of predictive models, in terms of AI, ML, underlying data, this COVID had very, very, very drastic impact in terms of the predictability of the models. Do we see the increased fraud during the first COVID wave as representative of what would happen in the future? Do we think that it's just transitory, right? So just adjusting and sort of revamping our models just for BAU predictions, right? Fraud, risk, default. It was a challenge. Secondly, just the data, right? For instance, when the first COVID wave hit, RBI announced, the government of India announced, right, that we will have a moratorium on loan repayments, which means bureau data got stale. We did not know who's able to pay, who's not able to pay. And we said, hey, if we can't, what do we do? Fortunately, the e-commerce part, right, the digital transactions part was booming. So we said, hey, can we get signals from that side to maybe make our models predict more accurately? That's the second piece. So those are some of the things, we kind of said, hey, to be able to run both our payments business, to be able to predict fraud better, to be able to predict risk better, given things have changed drastically in terms of the data that we have, how do we make our models predict better? And that's kind of, sort of things that the team worked on over the last 12 months or so.
Fascinating. Bhupinder, sort of in that sense, how much of a value, of a business value does AI ML provide? And when we look at India, where are we in terms of AI ML in comparison to, say, the global ecosystem?
So AI ML obviously presents a lot of opportunity to optimize your business, right? You can leverage AI to increase your top line. You can leverage AI for improving your bottom line as well, right? Now, in the Indian context, if I talk about our company, right, we are a company at Ecom. We have reasonable scale. We are probably one of the largest profitable startups in our genre that can serve almost 27,000 plus pin codes. We serve we have almost 3,000 locations pan India. And when you're serving such a large geographic footprint, it is important that you're optimized as a business and you're able to serve in a competitive manner the entire geography, right?
Right.
Now, in the Indian context, what is the hardest part of the puzzle is the last mile. You don't have standardized addresses in India. So just getting information from these addresses and building automated systems that can decide on the routing, right, on the last mile is a hard part of the puzzle. We've been working on those solutions, and we've successfully enabled that in several of our pilots. What is also difficult in the Indian context is being able to, in the crisscross topography of our cities, right? How do you ensure that the customers are finally getting their shipments? How do you ensure that our field staff is productive and is able to offer the best of experience in the last mile, right? Now, if you had system-driven approaches that were enabling you to design for scale, now if you have to do that, there are many pieces of the puzzle that have to be solved. Are your facilities positioned correctly, right? Are you able to offer competitive speed of the overall network? And can you ensure that while you're trying to maximize the experience on the last mile, you're also optimized in terms of how you are allocating your resources across the entire value chain, right, including the last mile. So we leverage AI to try and solve for those complex problems, and we are already seeing some benefit accrue from that.
Absolutely. We'll come about, to talk about that data availability part in just a bit. But let me ask this question to Sachin before I bring in Oliver also. Take us through how much of a business value really does AI provide, and where is India in the whole global ecosystem? Are we on par with what is available globally?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and maybe let me give my views on what I believe, where the industry sector I am in, which is fintech, and maybe some other sectors, right? And let me dispel a notion first, right? In the fintech sector, especially in the loans part, it's not that AI has been only recently making use in this sector, right? Go back 50 years. Anybody who wanted a loan still went through a automated underwriting process. The tools were different, the storage was different. Somebody used SAS, somebody used logistic regression, somebody used Oracle database, somebody used IBM mainframe for computing. So the tools have changed, they've become more efficient, algorithms have become much better. But as far as the use of AI is concerned in the lending business, it's been there for decades, and it's the core. Right? I mean, if you lend to the wrong people who don't have the capability, the willingness, or the ability to pay, you just don't have a business. So in that sense, given we have new tools, new algos, efficient storage, efficient computing, we have been able to kind of scale the business a lot more than what we could do 30 years ago. So in that sense, it's the core of the business. And that's core to fintech, as opposed to, hey, how useful or how accurate ML has to be for spam filtering, or how accurate ML has to be for showing an ad on a website, right? Imagine traveling with your family to a location, somebody in your family falls sick, you're trying to make a payment, and it gets denied because, hey, you never transacted from that location before. So the negative consequences of ML going wrong in the finance industry is far more riskier than any other industry. It has real consequences for people. And that's why it's kind of the core for financial sector. And I think from a global point of view, right, India, to be honest, just from how we digitally transact is far ahead even than the Western countries. We do UPI, we are far ahead. And hence the role of AI and ML is probably ahead even compared to the Western countries. We have two-factor authentication, Western countries don't. We have less fraud, many things. If you go to other sectors like, hey, self-driven cars, and we are talking about, some of the other things, maybe we are behind, but that's okay.
Absolutely. So I think what you're saying is it's a mixed bag. So before I bring in Oliver here, Just a request to our audience, please do send us your questions. We will take them at the end of the panel discussion. So please feel free. And if you want specific answers, do mention who you want the questions addressed to. Oliver, how would you sort of look at the situation? I mean, where does India currently stand in terms of in comparison to the global ecosystem, and how much of a business value does AI sort of provide in that sense?
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question, and I think one thing that I would always say, it's less about the region or the country, and it's more about the type of companies that we work together with and how they operate. But let me give you a few examples. I think going back to what I said earlier, and I totally echo Sachin's point of like machine learning, data science has been around for a while, but what has changed is the capabilities that you have at hand, specifically around natural language processing and specifically around computer vision. If you take, for example, a variety of Indian startups or smaller digital native businesses like work apps, right? They do KYC for financial applications like loans, etc. Computer vision, very useful when we suddenly had the situation with COVID-19 where people had to stay at home. We can't actually physically meet people, but we need to do KYC. Now we use computer vision to accelerate that. I think I remember correctly that they did about 40,000 KYCs validation just per day. Or look at Credit Bee, right? The Indian fintech startup tackling financial inclusion, again, using computer vision to identify applicants, to look at fraud prevention, right? You might be familiar with Haptic, right? The intelligent virtual assistant, again, launched in India, right? Uses some of our AI service for better customer experiences, for language, etc. And the list goes on. I think, the thing that I see, which is very interesting, is that they're echoing Sachin's point earlier, sometimes you have markets where digital first is the first thing. There are places in India or in other areas where people live a little bit more remotely. Mobile was the first way they got online, right? So you don't necessarily have legacy sometimes, which can really help you accelerate what you're trying to do. You combine that, with the availability of so many of these new machine learning models, with so many new data science frameworks that are available, and there's lots of innovation happening. And again, from an AWS perspective, we obviously encourage that, right? We make these tools and services available so that anyone, works with the same technology that some of the largest companies out there. So one thing that I would probably end this up with is to say, one thing that I really always appreciated prior when I could travel to India and now remotely is that you have a very vibrant startup ecosystem there too.
Right.
And you have now the startup ecosystem that gets access to the same technology that some of the largest conglomerates that you would find. And that creates a very interesting disruption, but a positive disruption, I would say, in the sense that everybody can use these tools to create, a better customer experience or create a faster, better experience for their consumers, no matter how small or how big you are. And that's really, really interesting.
Absolutely. It's quite an interesting point you make there. Sandeep, you had also sort of mentioned earlier, how COVID sort of pushed you towards adopting all of this faster. How much, does affordability continue to be a barrier, when it comes to sort of adoption of AI/ML? What are your thoughts on that?
Manu, I think, I want to echo a point that Oliver just mentioned about the fact that the pervasiveness of AI and ML and how advanced it is within an organization is a lot more dependent upon the type of organization you're working with rather than the geography. And I think, just to sort of add to that point here, for us as a gaming company, we believe in a lot of hyper-personalization. That's super important for us in order for us to be able to engage our users, because if a game's very easy for a user, he's going to walk away. If it's too tough for a user, for a player, he's going to walk away. And so we need to find the right degree of difficulty envelope for each player and personalize the user journey for him in a very sophisticated manner so that we can continue to retain, engage, and monetize them. So from that perspective, I feel in certain sectors, as Sachin mentioned, including fintech, gaming is also one of those sectors where I feel India has had a fair bit of advancements with respect to the kind of AI models that we've built in order to be able to help us retain our users better. Now, in terms of affordability, like this is where I think Oliver and his company, the company that he works for, comes in very, very handy, right? The whole notion of cloud computing has completely transformed how an organization thinks of affordability, right? And so whether, if I have to scale up phenomenally, like let's say even 10x or 15x for a certain match in an IPL, I don't think about it too much at all, because it's a pay-as-you-go model from the cloud. As long as I'm guaranteed a set of resources by the service provider, in this case AWS, and they've always been kind to be able to do that for us. I'm good. I'm going to only pay for the times that I'm going to use, and hopefully, if I have an efficient business model, I'm going to be able to monetize a lot more than the cost structure that I'm going to incur in order to support that business, right? And so the same is true for AI and ML as well. You deal with gobs and gobs of very large data sets. You deal with humongous computing environments, but all of that is deployed on the fly. We use infrastructure as code very heavily, and so for us to be able to spin up our environments on which we run distributed training of the models, or eventually run inferencing in an auto-scalable manner, all of that is facilitated by the likes of AWS so easily that affordability is not the top 5 things on my mind, at least.
Oh, okay. Sachin, do you agree with what Sandeep said? Is that the same? I mean, fintech, of course. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Does affordability come in the top 5?
Not in an absolute sense, right? So like Sandeep said, right, we really don't worry about, hey, let's spawn a few EMR clusters, let's train our models, let's use GPUs. No. Where I think in our world, so machine learning models are not deterministic, right? I mean, we don't know what the outcome may be like. So let's say we have a fraud detection model. We compute, 1,000 features. We are doing a anomaly detection using, I don't know, some isolation forest algo. I think where we kind of try to be careful is the benefit of the model offsetting the cost. And we do see instances where that may not be necessarily true. It's not in the absolute sense of, hey, 10 years ago I needed to pay for an IBM mainframe, or 20 years ago, but now I have a spot instance I can spawn. And so absolute agreement in terms of cost and affordability of computing resources, but some trade-off between the cost benefit of the ML model and its benefit.
Absolutely. Bhupinder, do you agree with what Sachin just mentioned?
Completely do. So when I look at affordability, I'm thinking about the time it takes to develop something and the other options that are on the table, other projects, initiatives that you have on the table, right? AI ML is truly transformational. So when you start about thinking about what are the areas you want to transform in your business, there are many possibilities out there, and out of those, you would have to carefully prioritize the few that give you the best bang for the buck, right? There is effort associated with an AI/ML model. There is scalability issues. There may be data quality issues that can probably slow you down to get to the final utopia stage, right? So one of the things that we like to do is put in very strict lens of scrutiny beforehand on whether you think that the effort is going to match the outcomes that you're expecting towards the end. Oftentimes, given the excitement around possibilities that AI ML is already driving on the ground and what will in the future, in the excitement, sometimes people don't take notice of the challenges that come along the way, right? So it is important to scrutinize those. However, there are obviously many advancements. If you look at challenges, the fact that you have scalable data systems, you have scalable infrastructure that can help you store and process large volumes of data, that can help you set up a large compute infrastructure for just a few hours, for just a few days by large technology providers. I think that has helped accelerate and circumvent some of the challenges that would otherwise be just too heavy on at least the small companies.
Absolutely. I think we'll just come to that bit about data in just a bit. But I want to ask this other question, which is, of course, there is ambition across businesses towards wider AI ML adoption. But are companies actually on the right path when it comes to their execution and strategy surrounding AI and of course, ML? Oliver, your thoughts? Maybe from a global perspective, and maybe on India, before we ask that.
Sure. I think you probably heard this expression of when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? And I think we have a similar situation here with AI, machine learning, or data science in general. I think as everyone agrees, and I think everyone who's probably watching here would agree that it's probably a necessity for most businesses, if not all businesses. However, what I would say is I think you see those companies that really successfully make use of machine learning AI models are the ones that basically drive it back from a business outcome, right? Which would be an improved customer experience, or which would be a faster way to deliver a packet if it's logistics or what have you, right? And go from there and then work backwards. Because one thing that I identified is that sometimes people jump to the latest and greatest AI framework, and I say, hey, some basic statistical modeling would probably have been sufficient to achieve that same outcome. Right. And so I think it's really about working backwards from it, just because you have the capabilities of, say, I can bring out a cluster of 1,000 nodes with the latest and greatest GPU in AWS. That doesn't really mean I should do that unless it's really required. One other thing that I want to add, though, to this is, apart from just working backwards from a business outcome, is also, machine learning, or generally if you build a model, there is no perfect model, meaning number one, your model needs to constantly evolve, and number two, your model constantly needs to be tweaked. So one of the interesting things that you find, in the software development world, we often talk about things like canary deployment or A/B testing. The same thing applies for data science, for machine learning and AI models, where, we always say it's about training, tuning, but then also deploying and monitoring your models, and constantly also monitoring them for performance, but also, for example, for things like bias, right? I want to make sure that my model performs optimally for everyone out there, and I don't just take a subgroup of people. If you look at some of the additions that we've done to the AWS platform over the past years, a lot about testing, tweaking, tuning, using things like Clarify to understand if there's bias, what are the parameters that basically affect my model, what are the data points that I can bring in. And then the other thing, I think, where you've seen a lot of new functionalities that we launched on top of the platform is also how can I wrangle my data a little bit better, because it's one of those things, if you search a needle in a haystack, that's going to take forever, right? More data does not mean a better model, right? So it's about, making sure that what is the kind of data sets that I'm using, how do I clean it, etc. How do I bring it in? And also how that changes over time. And again, I think here, the benefit of saying, with a cloud computing model, we have this new idea of data lakes where you can have completely unstructured data and say, I'll bring structure in later. That's very handy, right? In the more traditional way, you had one big data warehouse, everything was stored there. You had to have your idea of how the schema was from day one. And apart from it not scaling very well, that kind of limited to you what you could do. Now you can say, okay, just store things first. And then based on the business outcome, I go and pick the data and build my models out and improve them over time. So I think it all goes back to some of these good software engineering principles. They're exactly the same when it comes to AI and machine learning, and we want to apply them. And obviously our job from AWS is to make that easy and accessible for people to do.
Right. Sandeep, Oliver sort of referred to this. I mean, there's no really perfect model here. So in that sense, the same question, that I'd asked earlier, but because while there might be ambitions, across businesses towards adopting ML, are they really on the right path when it comes to the execution and strategy, particularly in Indian businesses?
Great question, Manu. I think, as Oliver put it very nicely, that when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I do think that AI and ML is overused in terms of the parlance, in terms of marketing spiel, as well as possibly in terms of solutioning as well. Right. But having said that, the bigger set of problems with AI and ML that I think Indian companies probably want to get out there quickly in order to help their own cause would be in terms of being able to create sophisticated ML ops pipelines. And that's an area of huge investment for us at this moment, because what I realize is that, we spend a lot of time, doing data wrangling upfront. And then we spend an enormous amount of time trying to create the right feature vector to be able to procure that feature vector in real time to be able to feed it to the model so that it can go to work and predict. And so that deployment of the model phase and the upfront wrangling of the data All of that takes a really, really long time. And then there are a lot of steps, as Oliver was also referring to, in terms of being able to monitor your models once you've trained and tuned your models, before you actually start to deploy it, do analysis on it. Once you've deployed it, look at explainability of the models. But you put all of that together, and there is not a single sophisticated pipeline that is out there that you can just use and say, hey, I've got an off the shelf solution here, and I'll go to work with it. So each company has its own specific needs in these areas, I feel. And this is personally, I feel maybe an area of underinvestment so far in some of the organization. Definitely for us has been an area of underinvestment, which we are now looking into significantly. Happy to hear thoughts from Bhupinder and Sachin also on how their experience has been about that.
Sachin, Bhupinder, would you want to respond to that? Sorry, Sachin, before I turn to you, just a reminder to our audience, we've got a brilliant panel here, so please do send in your questions. We'll take them towards the end of the session. So yeah, Sachin, please go ahead.
Thanks, Manu. Actually, I completely agree. I think there are two dimensions to it, right? The first thing I look at it is it's a law of diminishing returns, number one. And number two, what stage is the company that you're trying to use ML and AI for? If I'm a startup, I'm just starting, I'm launching a new product, I just don't have enough data to, kind of say I'm going to build a fancy ML model, right? So you go from just simple rules, you go from simple ML models, you go from more sophisticated as you get more data. But it's so, it's kind of easy to go from, hey, I'm going to build a model for whatever use case, and I'll get to 70, 80% prediction accuracy, let's say. It gets tougher and tougher and costlier as you try to, scale from 80, 85 to 90, 95 to say, okay, I'm going to do better than humans. And that's what I think businesses probably should realize, which I think at sometimes we don't. We tend to kind of, go into the sales pitch, I'm going to use a fancy deep learning model, and I'm, like sometimes those things don't work out. So in that sense, I completely agree with, Sandeep and Oliver from my point of view.
Absolutely. Bhupinder, would you want to give us your thoughts on that?
Sure. Both of them as well. In my experience, I think different companies in the specific space that they operate, they will have their own set of challenges. In certain companies, for certain use cases, you might not have enough data in the first place. Great example that Sachin pointed out. If you're just a startup and you have just initiated a business, there are many times situations where your dynamics of the business is so fast that AI/ML will just struggle to keep up, right? And you're constantly evolving. To turn around a machine learning model from data wrangling, putting it into the data systems, getting the model out, and then deploying that will be a challenge many times. The other significant areas where I think there's a lot of struggle is prioritization on the right use cases. It is prioritization basis the value and the challenges that you have on the table to accomplish what you are set out to accomplish, and then charting out a strategy that is executing in a phased manner so that you pick the lowest hanging fruits first, easy to accomplish, whether you get it out of analytics, a simple correlation plot, or you get it from a deep learning model. Basic principles of executing what is on the table first and then moving on to the more complex stuff. The other hardest part, I think, in the entire data science space is the area of change management, wherein to enable data science, the entire IT systems, the people, the processes, and the data science algorithms have to come together in a circle, in a feedback loop, to get to higher accuracies. You can't be feeding in bad data into a model. It has to come, the data will come through people. There have to be processes that have to be instrumented to capture the data, wait out to capture enough data, and monitor the data at scale. I think this is an area that I think many companies can do far more efficiently. I think what happens is sometimes in an organizational setup, some of these decision making gets siloed, and I think organizations should come together and bring the thought process in an integrated manner and that will be the game changer for many organizations in data science.
Quickly, I want to ask. I want to throw this question open to everybody. And Oliver sort of mentioned this earlier as well. More data doesn't really, result in the best models, or quality of data is absolutely critical. So one is the quality of data a concern in say a place like India, and B, is the technology really mature enough? Again, in markets like India, in providing accurate results that we want to sort of. Oliver, maybe you can take that question, and then I'll bring in the others as well.
One of the areas which I think is really interesting is, if we think about Web 2.0, and now we have this evolution of Web 3.0, of more decentralized systems, different players, etc. I think when we think about data, we very often start with, what do I have in my database, right? And I think that's actually a mistake. We need to leverage all the different kinds of data points that we can get access to. Like a lot of our customers use obviously the AWS platforms, but they maybe also use some of our partners' software as a solutions as kind of platforms. No matter if it's Salesforce or your marketer or what have you, you got to integrate those data points too. And then in addition to that, I would say, are there ways for other companies to barter data, which is this entire Web 3.0 or self-sovereign identity thing that is more and more coming up, where I can say, I don't know, I have my health data and I can barter it to different companies, and different companies can now accept it, and then based on that, give me basically maybe a service bag or give me an insight into my health data, what have you. So I think the other interesting thing that is happening, and again, this is only starting to really take off, but I think we'll see a lot more of that in the future, is kind of folks will have control of their own data sets, and they can give it to a variety of different platforms out there to enrich their data with whatever models they're running. So I think if we think about kind of building machine learning models, etc. You probably want to think, what do I have beyond just what I maybe have in my ERP system or my OLTP database? What are some of the other third-party providers that I maybe have access to, and what is my user willing to provide me with to get a better experience? And then the other thing, I just wanted to add a little bit on my earlier comment, and I totally agree with everything that was said. But one thing that I would say is, if you look, for example, at the AWS offerings, we do have these machine learning offerings where you can build your own machine learning models, either way, bring your algorithm, or we provide you with an algorithm. But then we also have these fully managed AI models where you say you can get started with having 0 data sets, right? Because basically we as AWS retrain and improve those models. Of course, they will have a very specific use case, like, I don't know, computer vision, facial recognition, document text extraction, document recognition, etc. Certain forecasting things, right? But so it's not always about, you don't always need to have a plethora of data to kind of get started. So you might have a model that is already trained, so you can use it. And then the other thing that I was kind of making the point about is to say, look, where could data sets be? It might not just only sit in your database. There might be other places where you can get it from.
Absolutely. Sachin, would you want to respond to that question earlier, about the quality of data and whether technology is really mature in providing accurate results, before we start taking questions from the audience?
Sure. So that's a great question, and I probably have, I have worked in the ad domain, search domain, being in the fintech sector, right? I think I face that data quality question a whole lot less, right? If I'm spending somewhere, that a dollar is a dollar, right? It's not going to get corrupted and I see $100 transaction. So I think from my point of view, it depends on the industry sector. And, I can imagine Bhupinder, like addresses, right, in India, fairly a tough research problem. Landmark, this, that, right? But within the fintech sector, I think from a data quality point of view, right? And this is where I say the signal to noise ratio in the industry that I am in right now is fairly high. So I don't see that as that big a problem, maybe compared to other industries. We do worry about, we do have things like, hey, somebody made a transaction. Is it me? Is it my daughter who's using my card? Is it a fraudulent person who has taken the account over? So those are the kinds of questions we worry about, not about really the fidelity of the data as much, to be honest.
Fascinating. So we'll start taking questions from the audience, because I can see some of the questions come in. The first question has come from Smriti Malhotra. What roles do CTOs play in reskilling to help organizations adapt the pace of AI and ML? Sandeep, would you want to take that question?
Sure. Manu, yeah, I think this, CTOs do play an important role in just any kind of technological evolution or transformation of the organization. And in that vein, AI and ML has been a fairly disruptive force over the last few years, and CTOs do have to end up playing a very important part in guiding the organization towards moving to a place where we can start to use more and more AI and ML for a lot of important use cases. Obviously, there'll be some use cases that are not worth the while. And then the question is, how do you go about staffing up for those kind of use cases? And so some of the folks are obviously, you're going to hire a bunch of data scientists and ML engineers, but then also there are a lot of people in-house who have a huge appetite and an interest to move over to creating ML models as well. And so in both veins, like I think the CTOs do play a important role in trying to reskill or at least advocate for reskilling within the organization, right, to help organizations adapt to that.
Bhupinder, would you want to take that question? What role do CTOs play in reskilling to help organizations adapt the pace of AI/ML?
I think the role of CTO is immense, cutting across all of the steps that you would have to do to build a strong AI/ML model. Right from data wrangling, you would need data engineers. You start with analysts who may come in with a lot of domain expertise. You will need people who would churn out dashboards, who would understand the business, work with the business leaders to sort of pull together screens that would meaningfully track many of the metrics that you care about. And the data science specialist, right? It could be a person who's exclusively worked on chatbots, knowledge graphs, text mining models, image processing models, operations research scientists. And you don't oftentimes find all of that in one person, right? You would necessarily have to have a diverse set of skill sets pulled together into one strong team and cross leverage skills from an organization, right? I think a strong data scientist would also necessarily be someone who takes deep interest in understanding the business, in understanding the domain that is for which a model is being built, right? So in an organization, given the enormous amount of interest that is there in data science, there are many people coming in from many walks of life who are interested in data science, right? You could have people who are specialists in HR, who are specialists in biosciences, in geoinformatics, and all of them have a role to play. All of them have niche areas where they can very strongly contribute in data science, right? So just putting together, thinking through with your employees career paths that would enable and enrich your data science team, have people cut over into data science at the right time for the right use cases. I think that's one way to think about that. At least we at Ecom Express, we heavily engage with different functions because we are trying to embed data science in almost all of the functions across the organization. So
Right.
there's a lot of reskilling that way that can be done by engaging with your employees and training them.
Right. We've got another question from Sonu Saini. Is fear of getting locked into a platform holding organization back from cutting edge insights and analytics to drive growth in the business? Let me maybe throw that question to Oliver. Do you want me to repeat the question, Oliver, if you got it?
Sure. So I think this is, to start it off, this is not specific to just AI and machine learning, but just in general. I think cloud computing has revolutionized how we actually consume IT. Traditionally, you kind of had a contract that you signed, you bought a bunch of stuff, and then you were kind of stuck with that. So you had to be really careful about what you were buying and what you were using, right? With cloud computing, that's fundamentally flipped on its hat, right? I can use any kind of service I want at any point in time, and I can stop using that service at any point in time. So from a business model perspective, I think, it's already great that we actually have all these capabilities in that cloud computing providers, such as AWS, give you the flexibility of, hey, you can even get started for free on all of that. run a little POC. If you're happy with it, then you can start consuming more, and you only pay for what you consume. The other thing, and again here I'm speaking for AWS behalf. This might not hold true for every provider out there, but if you look at machine learning, right, there are tons of very cool frameworks out there. MXNet, TensorFlow, PyTorch. Their interface like Keras, you name it. There are plenty of them out there. For AWS, for example, we are completely agnostic to which framework you use. We optimize our platform for a variety of these frameworks so that you can really lower the cost of training or inferring from your machine learning models. But because of that, you basically have the flexibility of say, I can actually move that model around. And not only is that something that we allow our customers to do, there are actual use cases where that can make sense. So if you look at, for example, the entire space of edge computing, like for example, we have a lot of customers that say, I train my machine learning models with this massive data set in a massive cluster in AWS, but the outcome model, I send it to my mobile phone and that runs in that mobile phone, or that runs in my device on an edge location, that runs on a gateway in my warehouse facilities, right? That is totally fine. And not only, do we provide you with the tools with that, but depending on your use case, we actually encourage you and have a variety of services that can help you do that. So I think it all goes back to, number one, from a business model perspective, cloud computing is perfect because you can experiment. If you're happy with it, you can continue to use it. If not, then you can maybe experiment around. And in addition to that, there's so many different kind of frameworks. I wouldn't quite call it the standard, right? But different frameworks that allow me to easily create portability in those models, and then even run them, maybe at the edge if I want to do so.
Right. We're getting a lot of questions. So I'm going to take two more questions. Right. This one has come from Sudhir Rao. It'll be great to hear the esteemed panelists' opinion on leveraging third-party data for creating better ML models. Sachin, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it has a few dimensions, right? If you look at large-scale data that one could potentially leverage, right? You could think of the telecom sector, you could think of the social media sector, you could probably think of the payment sector as well. These are data sets that scale to the scale of population in India, right? Adult population in India. So in that sense, absolutely. But I think where it gets tricky is, we have to be really careful about what's permissible to be used. And today, the privacy laws are such that maybe it's okay. Maybe you can probably take some chances and use some data. But once the new PDP laws come in, right, I think the user's explicit consent and explicit permissions, regardless of the source of data using from, will become very important. So ideally, just from a modeling AI ML point of view, absolutely right. The more diverse data sources, the better you can be. But I think it has to be in the context of getting consent from the user. Without that, I think I think it's maybe the laws are lax right now, but I think we'll get to a point where we'll be sort of equivalent to GDPR, and if you want to use telecom data and you're doing something with respect to logistics, probably not a good idea.
Sandeep, do you want to comment on that? The question was, it'll be great to hear the esteemed panelists' opinion on leveraging third-party data for creating ML models. So maybe quickly your thoughts.
Yeah, it's absolutely very, very useful. We as a gaming company use it a lot. As it turns out, we use third-party data from PayU to help us with deposit personalization for the first time when a player comes in. There's lots of data that's something that we cannot essentially create, that's out there with other parties, such as payment processing companies or telcos. And obviously, we would like to use that data, and we do currently use that data to improve the accuracy of our models.
Right. Bhupinder, quickly, I know you want to respond to that, so maybe quickly, before I take the last question from the audience.
So there's a lot of opportunities to enrich data that you have. For example, addresses, you could use publicly available landmarks, crowdsource mapping information to start doing meaningful stuff, and that would certainly improve the accuracy of your models. So plenty of opportunity. One just has to be creative around exploring options.
Absolutely. We've got one last question from we've got a few more, but we'll take this last question from the audience. What is the panel's take on build versus buy strategy with regards to artificial intelligence and machine learning? Using ML services from cloud providers vis-a-vis custom development. I think the question is open to everybody. So what are your thoughts? I'll bring Oliver late in this. Maybe I'll start with Sachin and then the others.
Yeah, sure. I think it depends on the use case, right? And I'll give you an example. If I were to build a risk model to be able to give unsecured loan, right? That's core to my business. I will not outsource that. And I will build that in-house. But if I were to now say, hey, should I have a chatbot that actually services customers' queries? That's probably not core to my business, and I'm okay to kind of buy that. So I think it depends on what's core to the business and what's a little peripheral. That's my short answer.
Absolutely. Sandeep, Bhupinder, would you want to add to that?
Sure. If I may. I think, again, it is a build versus buy. I would have a preference for speed. So if you can buy something, yes, one would go ahead. But again, in context of the specific models that are core to your business, will probably become differentiators in your marketplace, you may retain. There are also many scenarios that you can run into where you may need a lot of customization, and generic models, even with the best of platforms, may not do as well without the custom data and custom tuning that is so core to your business. In, again, those scenarios, you would probably retain, right? But if there are options on the table, buy is a good option.
Right. Oliver, your thoughts?
With all these comments, I think, it always depends if it's core to your business. But beyond that, I would say, I would probably recommend my customers always to start from the top and say, take whatever's there, which fully managed, try things out, get confidence if it works, or if you get the business outcome that you want, take one of the fully managed AI services. And then if that works well and you identify it, and the word core to your business was mentioned a few times, I totally agree with that. Then you maybe want to, go a little bit more into your custom development. If you look at it from an AWS perspective, that's exactly how we see it. Fully managed AI services that we just get as such. Then you have machine learning models that you can build yourself, but with algorithm that we or some of our huge partner ecosystem, because there's an entire marketplace, for specific industries, there are partners that create models that I can use with my data, all the way to I really want to do custom kind of training. But just earlier to that question about reskilling people, I think this is where this comes in. I don't want to encourage as a CTO to say everybody now should become a data scientist, right? What I rather want to do is how can I enable my organization that anyone within the organization can make intelligent use of that data? And, like it was mentioned earlier, some of this might come out of these fully managed AI models, whereas other, I might really want to dive into it and build my own model out there. So I would value these options off, but I think, it's never wrong to kind of quickly get started with, something that's available and there to validate an idea. And if that then works and it's core to my business, then I maybe go one level deeper.
Absolutely. Fascinating. So, I know we are well short on time. It's time to wrap up. So I'll take closing comments from all of you gentlemen. Maybe you can give us your perspective on, right now we are at a crucial juncture. There's so much uncertainty around us. Where do you see AI ML, in the coming years, and the role that it's going to play in businesses as we go forward and maybe out of the pandemic? Sandeep, we'll start with you, and then we'll go to everybody.
I do think AI ML is going to be more and more pervasive as we go along. I do see not too much in the distant future a day when we'd be having an AI model create a complete game from scratch. We're already getting there. There are parts of the game that are being done by AI models, such as level generation or even character creation. And I don't foresee a long time before we'll be creating entire games through AI models.
Okay. Bhupinder, will they be delivering? What's going to happen?
AI is going to be truly transformational. And AI ML in conjunction with a bunch of technologies that we will see in the next decade, EVs, drones, IoT. There's a lot that the next couple of decades have for us. And you'll see far more data scientists doing exciting work, transforming lives for sure.
Interesting. Sachin, your closing thoughts?
Sure. I mean, almost a cliche, right? What the browser did, what the internet did, what HTTP did. I think, the last 20 years, AI, ML will kind of do the same thing over the next 20. Specifically from a fintech point of view, right? I think, we'll build better and better models. There'll be a lot more. But one thing I feel that's going to get more and more important from my point of view is what we call responsible AI. So AI treating folks fairly, treating folks without discrimination, and treating folks, in a just way. I think that'll get a lot more scrutiny. Already regulators are onto it. Niti Aayog has, kind of put out some document. I think from a financial industry point of view, that will also start to take center stage in the next few years.
Absolutely. Oliver, your parting thoughts on how things will shape up in the years to come.
Sure. So I echo all of the other panelists' comments. I would probably end up by saying, experimentation generally leads to innovation, as long as you don't have to live with the collateral damage of these failed experiments. And I think this is where cloud computing really comes in. You can easily get started. And I would encourage folks that, are not on that journey yet by using analytics or data or AI machine learning. I would encourage them, hey, have a look into it. It might not be as complex and complicated as you think to get started. And lots and lots of tools and services available to get started quickly. Plenty of other folks, from AWS and other partners out there that can help you get started. But, again, also to echo Sachin's point, I think, there's an interesting landscape where we see more and more adoption of AI and machine learning models. And we see, more questions that pop up. How is that being used? So I think, again, cloud provider like AWS can help you to answer some of those questions. So it's about experimentation, but safe experimentation. There are plenty of frameworks, tools, services available to kind of allow for that. So, my little sales pitch at the end, if you're interested. We're happy to help you with it, but I think that's kind of where I see it going. That experimentation needs to be enabled to drive that innovation.
Right. On that note, thank you, gentlemen. It's been a fabulous discussion. Obviously, we wish we could have continued for longer. There's so much more to talk about, but we have to respect time. So thank you once again for joining us, and of course to our audience and to all of you. Please stay safe, mask up, don't venture out unnecessarily. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Forbes India presents AWS The Mavericks in association with Matrix Partners India.